Thank you for tuning in to the Voice of the Victim podcast. We discuss a lot of sad and potentially triggering things on this show. We try to be as sensitive and cautious as possible, but if you are sensitive to things involving abuse and may be triggered, please think twice before listening to our show.
Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
How are you doing tonight, Rosie?
I'm good. I just downed a ton of chocolate and I'm feeling better.
Yeah, and I see you're drinking a sparkling water, so who knows what will be coming out of your mouth within the next couple seconds.
Sparkling water does make me a little burpy, but I am confident in my neck.
That's why I can't drink sparkling water when we record.
Throat muscles.
Yeah, everyone understands. All right, so before we get started tonight, we have a new patron to thank. Thank you, Kaylin.
Yay, Kaylin.
And she left us a really sweet message on Patreon, too. Rosie, will you read that?
Sure. It says, "Hi. Just wanted to drop in and thank you two for the wonderful job you do. I am new to podcasts, really, and finding one I really enjoyed proved to be difficult. For some reason, I kept returning to Voice of the Victim. There is something done right in the narrating you two do together. The fact that you are a couple is also a neat bonus. Don't worry about the mispronunciation, we all do it. It's usually a welcomed breath in a dark scenario. Love you guys."
That is so sweet, and I appreciate that perspective, because we do talk about a lot of really rough, dark stuff.
Obviously, my mispronunciations are in the script.
Yeah.
To welcome a fresh breath.
You'll definitely see that tonight when we start getting into names.
Oh, no.
But that was kind of like a review, because it was a message from a patron, but we also have a review from Apple Podcasts that comes from Italy. And Rosie, will you read that as well, or do you want me to?
You can take the rein.
I suppose I should, huh? All right, it's entitled First Impressions from Chris Reen N. I hope I pronounced that right. If not, let me know and I'll correct it next week. But they say, "Hi, I've been an avid crime podcast listener for years, and today, for the first time, I listened to your show. What an original and refreshing break from the polished read-from-script approach. I applaud your frankness, your spontaneity, your compassion, and humanity. I gave you a 5-star review, which you deserve, and subscribed. Keep up the good work, and don't be daunted by those who gratuitously throw insults your way. An American retired literature teacher from Rome, Italy." Thank you so much. That's
Love this.
So sweet. So, thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of Voice of the Victim podcast is supported by Free Lunch Coffee.
Okay, I am so excited to talk about this new sponsor. I'm always looking for little and easy ways to make a difference, and it really can't get any easier than this. When you buy just one bag of Free Lunch Coffee, you're providing 10 meals to children in need. And Free Lunch Coffee gives away 50% of the money they make to end hunger in the lives of young children. How cool is that? There are children out there who really need our support, and it can be difficult and intimidating knowing where to start and how to help. Free Lunch Coffee is the easiest way to help. While you're enjoying your hot cup of joe in the morning, you're also helping feed hungry kids. Another great thing? Free Lunch Coffee has great coffee that is specialty grade, certified organic, and fair trade.
Free Lunch Coffee offers a 100% money-back guarantee for 30 days, so you have nothing to lose by trying them out. Right now, they're offering a 10% discount to you if you use their coupon code AWARENESS at checkout. That's coupon code AWARENESS at freelunchcoffee.com. So go check it out. Again, that's freelunchcoffee.com, coupon code AWARENESS. All right, well, that's enough happiness. Now it's time to get into something that's just a mess of a story. And a lot of you probably have heard about the circumstances in Rwanda during the Civil War in the early 90s. We actually started recording this last night, and then Rosie recommended that we watch Hotel Rwanda before we record because I've never seen it. And I'm really glad we did because it really helped me to get a sense of exactly what was happening during this time in Rwanda.
Right.
It's unbelievable. But if you've seen the movie, you have an idea of the kind of chaos that was going on in Rwanda in the mid-90s. It was based on prejudice between the Hutus and the Tutsis. But it goes back much further than the 90s. Mm-hmm. So, Rosie, are you ready to get into this?
Mm-hmm. When Rwanda was first colonized by Belgians, Rwanda was populated by two tribes. The majority was Hutu and the minority was Tutsi. There's also a couple other tribes, but they're really minor.
Yeah, these are the two that are involved in the story, so that's all we're mentioning.
Mm-hmm. But when the Belgians arrived, they favored the Tutsis because many of them had paler complexions and narrower noses.
So basically, it stemmed from racism. The Belgians preferred the Tutsis seemingly because they weren't as black. Is that what you would say, Rosie?
I would say that, and also they were taller, and I can't remember if they were shepherds or if they were...
Well, we recommend you watch Hotel Rwanda because they explain it in the movie. But this favoritism led to the Tutsis being more wealthy than the Hutus, which then turned into envy. And according to History.com, the Tutsis were a bit oppressive to the Hutus. I'm guessing some of them probably had a higher opinion of themselves than they did of their Hutu neighbors. Mm-hmm. So that kind of caused some unrest.
But in 1959, the Hutus rose up in a revolution and forced around 330,000 Tutsis out of Rwanda, making them an even smaller minority than before. In early 1961, the Hutus forced the Tutsi monarch out of the country and declared Rwanda a republic. Then, in July of 1962, the UN agreed to grant Rwanda independence from Belgium.
Sorry we're going on kind of a history lesson here, but it's important to understand where these tensions came from. And the ethnic tensions and prejudice still continued even after Rwanda gained independence. In 1973, a military group put a Hutu general named Juvenal Habiyaremye in power, and he eventually became the president after the Rwandan constitution in 1978 made it so they had a president, and he remained the president until the early 90s.
In 1990, a rebel group of Tutsi refugees called the RPF, or Rwandan Patriotic Front, formed from people who had been forced out of Rwanda and into Uganda. They invaded that year, which led to the president arresting hundreds of Tutsi residents and accusing them of conspiring with the RPF. Between 1990 and 1993, hundreds of Tutsis were massacred by the direction of government officials.
Now, obviously, living conditions were horrible for the innocent residents of Rwanda who just wanted to live their lives and didn't care about the political prejudice. I mean, they were accusing these random Tutsis who just lived in Rwanda for being co-conspirators with the invading forces, which was actually made up of refugees who were driven out before. So it's just a giant mess. But in August of 1993, the president signed a peace agreement with the RPF, which gave people hope that the violence would stop, because that's the main goal, you would think.
But on April 6, 1994, the president was assassinated when his plane was shot down.
Now, just to remind you, the president was installed by Hutus. He was a Hutu president. After the monarchy, which had been a Tutsi, the king was a Tutsi. So it was a shift in power. But the killer was assumed to be a Tutsi because the president was Hutu. And people, they blamed the Tutsis or the RPF for shooting down the plane. But there's also a very good possibility that it was one of the Hutu extremists trying to incite violence.
That's what I think it is.
To be able to blame it on the Tutsis and use that as an excuse to start attacking Tutsis. And this theory, like you just mentioned, makes a lot of sense when you consider what happened next.
Right.
Now, before this, Hutus had been massacring Tutsis, but it was only like in the hundreds of victims. So keep that in mind.
With the new power vacuum formed by the assassination of the president, Hutu militia groups called the Interahamwe, is that how you say that?
Yeah, I think that's
I
as
don't
good
know
as
how to
I
say the
could.
next one. And
Impuza Mugambi.
yeah, Impuza Mugambi began a rampage of violence that would lead to the deaths of around 800,000 people, mostly Tutsis. But Hutus who refused to take a stand against the Tutsis also were cut down.
So basically, it just turned into absolute chaos in Rwanda. A Hutu-controlled radio station basically put out an announcement to cut down the tall trees, which was their code for start killing your Tutsi neighbors. And the militias of Hutu extremists started going around and checking people's IDs and then killing them if they were Tutsi. So it was just a total mess. But this week we're focusing on the story of one particular family who was affected by this massacre. It's the family of Cedric Habiyaremye. I hope I'm saying that right. A lot of these names I tried to find pronunciations for, but I just couldn't find them. So we're going to do our best to sound it out based on how we've heard other African names pronounced. So take it easy on us if we get it wrong. But Rosie, you ready to start talking about Cedric?
7-year-old Cedric lived with his family in Rwanda on April 7th, 1994. His parents were Jean Damascene, Habumugisha, and Agnes Mukankwaya.
Very nice. And just to remind you, April 7th, 1994, that's the day the president's plane was shot down, or the day after. So, yeah, this is what was going on while he was 7 years old.
Okay. Cedric also had an older brother named Pacifique Intirenganya.
Very nice. Again, this is just hopefully the right pronunciation, but probably not. Anyway.
That was the day that civil war broke out in Rwanda. It was a chaotic scene. People were screaming, running, and hiding. As they fled, the family stumbled across the lifeless bodies of many people that they knew. 7-year-old Cedric saw people he'd grown up with and played soccer with. Now they were dead right in front of him.
And this all happened so suddenly. Again, to get a real grasp on the chaos and just absolute misery these poor people were going through, definitely watch Hotel Rwanda. It's worth it.
Most of the victims were killed in their own villages, by their neighbors and fellow villagers. Hutu gangs searched out people hiding in churches and schools. The militias used machetes and rifles to murder people. And there was also a lot of sexual violence. Between 1/4 to 500,000 women were raped during this genocidal massacre. Many of the survivors of the rapes were infected with HIV, and this was no accident. Hutu extremists had actually released hundreds of hospital patients suffering from AIDS and formed them into a rape squad to intentionally infect the Tutsi rape victims. Not only that, but Tutsi women were violently attacked with the intent to destroy their reproductive capabilities. The attackers would try to mutilate women's reproductive organs with weapons like knives, machetes, and sharpened sticks. And some even used boiling water and acid.
So, this is absolutely insane. The Hutu extremist goal was to wipe out Tutsis. It was like, a low-level Holocaust of Tutsis.
Right. I think it's interesting, and we talked about this before, that you especially hadn't even heard of this movie. I watched it in school, but although the Holocaust is on a much grander scale, the time that all of these people were killed, the short amount of time of just a few months, is like, it's a really an incredible, terrible massacre that I'm surprised is not talked about more.
I know. And it wasn't that long ago.
No.
It was I mean, I was 3 years old when this happened. I still remember this being on the news.
You do?
Yeah, I remember because after this happened, there was still a lot of news about the tensions between the Tutsis and the Hutus. And I remember hearing those words on the news, and I was like, oh, that sounds funny, Tutsi. But when I was 3 years old, I couldn't grasp what was actually happening. But it was so recent.
I can't help but wonder if one of the reasons why this isn't more widely known is because of all the countries that pulled out and just left them to fend for themselves.
It's true. It was a lot different than World War II, where people wanted to get involved and make a name for themselves. But like we saw in the movie, Belgians pulled out.
French pulled out.
The UN pulled out. So pretty much all the
Americans pulled out.
Yeah, all the major powers in the world that have the capability to help pulled out for a time and just said, deal with it on your own, Rwanda.
And because of a bad reputation and calls for help, they realized that they had to do something.
Yeah.
It was getting too publicized.
Like you mentioned in the movie, the general decided to help once a few of his men were killed. He didn't decide to help Rwandans.
In fact, he wasn't even supposed to shoot anybody. Not that I'm advocating for shooting people.
Right. But the motives for helping out the innocent people were obviously colored by wanting to save their own face and not wanting to help people. And I'm not saying that's all of them. I'm just saying the people who were in control seemed to not want to get involved until their name was on the line.
Because it wasn't good for them. They weren't getting anything out of the deal.
Right.
Anyway, we're not going to dive into politics, right, Ryan?
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think we already explained all the political stuff that we need to talk about now. Now we want to grasp the human level of what was happening, which is why we're talking about Cedric and his family, because hundreds of thousands of other people had to endure very similar circumstances to this during this time. And the craziest thing to me is that the government-sponsored radio and local government officials were the ones inciting the violence because, they were in control. They had just had this recent power vacuum, so now anyone who was extreme, who had a position of power, was inciting violence by spreading this propaganda. So what did they... I mean, we already explained the cut down the trees thing, but what else did they do?
Right. The militia told people to kill their neighbors, and those who actively refused to kill were often murdered on the spot. On April 9th, at the church in Gikondo, Rwanda, around 110 Tutsi people, mostly children, were killed.
Yeah, that's another thing that stood out to me during the movie, is that there was no discretion for children. In fact, they were specifically targeting children because they wanted to kill the future.
Yeah, they
of
wanted
the
the next generation gone. Another similar massacre happened on April 12th at a Catholic church where over 1,500 Tutsis were trying to hide from the violence. The attackers used bulldozers to knock down the church building, and the militia, armed with machetes, cut down any person who tried to escape.
It's so ridiculous because these are just innocent families, women and children, who were trying to be peaceful, but they were killed because of their identity. Like, if these extremists had such a bias against Tutsi people for treating them poorly in the past or whatever, what do these children have to do with it? They didn't have anything to do with any kind of prejudice that their ancestors held against the Hutu people. So it's so...
Well, and even their ancestors, it was all doled out by the Belgian government, the social classes.
Yeah. But still, it's misdirected anger.
Right.
It's the same problem I talk about a lot, judging groups of people based on their identity or judging a person based on what group they are in. Especially groups that are beyond their control, like a race or an ethnicity. You can't control that. So how could you possibly judge someone for that? Anyway, I don't want to get off topic anymore. And we talked about that church where all the families and women and children were killed, 1,500 people. It turns out the local priest who worked at the church actually played a role in the demolition of his own church. and later he was found guilty of genocide once this was all over. Genocide and crimes against humanity, and sentenced to life in prison. How scary and sad is it that these people turned to this priest for protection, and then he went and turned on them, and this whole thing is unbelievable to me. But cases like this were happening all over Rwanda during the Civil War, so it gives you an idea of the nightmares Cedric and his family were facing. So where did Cedric end up after all this?
Cedric, along with his mother, father, and older brother, all somehow managed to survive these brutal attacks. They were constantly running away and fleeing the violence for nearly a month. At night, they ran east on foot under cover of darkness, and during the day, they hid in forests and bushes to avoid being seen. When they finally made it across the border to Tanzania, they discovered a makeshift refugee camp with thousands of other Rwandan families who had desperately fled their homes.
Can you imagine being forced out of your home in such a horrific way, and so suddenly? Within 24 hours, around 250,000 Rwandans had fled to Tanzania, and all these people were suddenly homeless as far as they knew, and fearful just to keep their lives. Like they didn't know what was going to happen now.
Despite the awful circumstances, Cedric remembers feeling a peace and relief when they reached the camp. They were finally able to stop running away from murderous neighbors and sleep through a full night.
Again, so many parallels between Cedric's story and Hotel Rwanda. And if you watch the movie, you'll know what I mean. But despite this feeling of relief he had, the circumstances were just horrible. What he and his family had gone through caused him to have terrible nightmares even after this. And, it's not an easy time living in a refugee camp with no water, no food. I mean, you're literally just trying to survive.
The following days spent in that camp were difficult, with Cedric and his family fighting just to survive. Even the children were completely exhausted from their trek, so they had no energy to play. They would just sit around waiting for the World Food Program to show up with rations for them, and they suffered from extreme boredom.
And Cedric described it as feeling stuck, which, so unsettling to not know what your future holds, and stressful for all these thousands of families.
Many people died during this time because of the poor hygiene and sanitation caused by the horrible living conditions within the massive camp. During this time, Cedric missed his life of just being normal, playing with friends and going to school. All that had suddenly been ripped away from him and thousands of other children. Thankfully, agencies like the World Food Program, UN Children's Fund, and UN High Commissioner for Refugees was able to help. Cedric says that their services helped save his life and lives of many people that he knew. They provided food, shelter, blankets, and even built schools.
It's so sad that they didn't even have these bare essentials when they fled. They literally lost everything but their lives. They couldn't take anything because it was so sudden. And even with all this help, the quality of their lives had diminished so much.
Cedric remembers that during this time, even though he had no energy to play, when he saw the trucks coming with the deliveries, he would manage to stand up and run behind them.
Yeah, he said that he and others would even sing just out of joy when these trucks showed up because it was so reassuring to know there was food coming, which meant they had more days to live and to be able to play. Like, he had such an appreciation for the simplest things in life because he had lost so much, which is really sobering.
Remember, this is a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
So a 7-year-old telling us, or whoever he was telling, that...
Well, he's saying this in the future, but still, to think this at 7 years old.
Meant more days for them to play. That's heartbreaking. After that, Cedric said, people who have experienced hunger and starvation may understand that feeling. Even just knowing food is around the corner could reduce our despair.
Yeah. So now back in Rwanda, the RPF started to gain control again over the Hutu extremist militias, and by July, After almost 3 months, the mass killings finally ended. But this led to over 2 million people, mostly Hutus, fleeing Rwanda into the Congo. And I would guess this was out of fear of retaliation, maybe. Again, the majority of these Hutus are innocent citizens who just want to live their lives, most of whom were forced into slaughtering their Tutsi neighbors because they had to choose between that and death, which obviously the right choice is very complicated. How could you know if you're not in this situation?
I don't know if there is necessarily a right choice.
No, there's not, because it's a decision no one should ever have to make. But because of these stupid extremist groups, a lot of people would see all Hutus as bad after this massacre.
Right. Which would cause another war in the future, right? Eventually, after the genocide ended, Cedric and his family were able to return to Rwanda and try to rebuild their lives.
And this obviously wasn't going to be easy. After the entire country was uprooted, they lost basically their society. It turned into complete chaos.
Just having enough food to survive continued to be a struggle for the family. Cedric's father and uncle would need to go out and actively search for any source of food to bring home to the family. But one day, not long after they returned to Rwanda, Cedric's father and uncle left in search of food, but they never returned. Because of the massive stress the genocide had put on the country, violence was extremely rampant, and the two of them had been killed.
So this is awful news for Cedric and his family. You imagine, after all the work they'd put in just to survive, escaping the violence on foot and running to a different country on foot. And once they finally thought it was safe to return home, they did. And just grateful to have survived and hopeful to rebuild their lives. But then this happens. He literally loses the two men who were helping care for him and his family during this absolutely devastating time.
On top of all that, Cedric learned that many more of his friends had not survived the war, from classmates and neighbors to other relatives.
So this was really tragic for young Cedric, and he started to lose the will to live.
He said, quote, "I started feeling like I should die too, that there was nothing left for me. I felt like, why am I still standing? What's the point of existing anyway?"
Can you imagine feeling this existential dread at 7 years old?
No, I can't.
Not seeing a future for yourself?
But his mother Agnes saw that her son was lost. She sat down with Cedric and his brother Pacifique and had a talk with them. She said, "I see you're so desperate and feel like this is the end of your lives. But this is not the end of the world. I see a lot of potential in you. You are the future of this country, and you can save the world. You can save people's lives."
Can we just take a sec to appreciate how amazing Agnes is as a mother? She just lost her husband and either brother or brother-in-law, and she still has the strength to be so supportive of her children. That's a really good mom right there.
But despite the beautiful sentiment, these words were a lot for a nearly 8-year-old child to digest. Cedric felt overwhelmed at the idea of saving other people's lives when he felt powerless to even save himself, and he actually got up and started walking away. But Agnes pulled him back and sat him down again. Then she said, "I see you are upset, and that what I'm saying doesn't make sense to you, but the only way to become the man you want to become, and to make the impact you want to make in this world and in this country, is to go to school and study."
And at the time, Cedric felt angry because he didn't want to think about the future at a time like this. He was hurt, as anyone would be in the situation. And it was just a horrible situation for him. Too much to think about something so huge. And at this point, his family would regularly go 2 to 3 days without food. So he didn't even know if he'd be alive tomorrow. So this just overwhelmed him.
Cedric went outside and sat under a tree crying. He was overwhelmed with the pain of his situation. But his brother had stayed and listened to what Agnes was saying. After she finished, Pacifique came outside and sat down next to Cedric. They were both in tears, but eventually Pacifique spoke and said, "Maybe she's right. Let's wait and see." Cedric was upset, feeling like they were teaming up on him, and his brother was taking her side. He asked angrily, "If you think she's right, what do you want to do if we survive this?" Pacifique replied, "Dad was a pharmacist, and we have a lot of people dying around us. Maybe I will study pharmacy and be able to give medicine to people." Then he asked Cedric, "So what about you?"
And by this point, Cedric had calmed down because his brother and mom were being very good to him, being supportive because he was the youngest. And so they were really strong for him. And he appreciated his brother's optimism. But, all he could think about was the thing that was currently plaguing his family. They were starving.
He said, "We are hungry. We don't have food. Maybe I'll go study agriculture and find ways to produce enough food so we won't go to bed hungry anymore." The two boys pinky promised each other that they'd stick to their dreams no matter what.
Now, this is something a couple of kids could easily talk about one day when they're children and then completely forget about and move on.
Right.
But they actually followed through. Turns out Cedric had gotten a 25-cent loan from a family friend, which he used to start selling candy to help pay for his tuition and uniforms to elementary school. And once again, I'm so grateful to live in a place where basic education is provided for kids, who can't afford tuition costs. Can you imagine having to pay a tuition to elementary school? And honestly, I very much took school for granted when I was growing up. As much as I could go on and on about what a scam certain things in America are, like health insurance and pharmaceutical costs, those are just luxuries compared to what Cedric and his family were trying to do here, just to survive and start getting educated. You can't take for granted what's literally not granted to you. So it's just amazing that he put in the work to get a basic education like this.
Mm-hmm. And Cedric did very well in school, and he eventually was able to attend the University of Rwanda and earn a bachelor's degree. But he did a lot more than get educated. He put in the time at a local community organization called Building Bridges with Rwanda, where he'd help create kitchen gardens and home compost to make it possible for families to grow their own food and combat the hunger crisis. This work led him to earning a scholarship at Washington State University, where he worked toward a PhD in crop sciences. He even earned an award called the World Hunger Leadership Award for the work he'd done in agriculture and food security, and became the youngest member of the Global Agriculture Task Force for the Chicago Council of Global Affairs.
So just think about that. We talked about the unimaginable hardships that Cedric faced as a child and how many obstacles he had to jump through just to survive and get a basic education. But he was able to accomplish so much. Like, can you imagine having that kind of drive?
I wish I had half of it.
Same. It's amazing.
At this point, more than 70% of Rwandans work in agriculture, and yet there's still a problem with malnutrition and physical stunting. Cedric believes this is due to poor quality crops, as well as a lack of dietary diversity. But he had an idea to help solve this problem. He discovered that quinoa contains 9 essential amino acids, so it's a great source of protein. And delicious, may I add. This led him to find his own company called Quinoa Hub to promote research and the production of quinoa in Rwanda. He's hopeful that it could transform the nutrition of his country.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. He actually did an interview with Unfoundation, which was our source for a lot of the stuff about him. But in the interview, he said that by introducing quinoa into Rwanda and teaching farmers how to grow and eat it, I could help contribute to the socioeconomic development as well as the well-being of the people in my country. Because nobody knew about quinoa in Rwanda except expats who had lived abroad. So it's just insane that he is doing so much to help people after everything he had been through. He followed through on that pinky promise he made to his brother. And
That's pretty cool.
yeah, it's amazing.
Quinoa Hub tests varieties of quinoa to see which types grow the best in different zones of Rwanda, and also works with some food processing companies to produce different quinoa products.
Again, to draw a contrast, it's funny how much emphasis we in America put on processed foods being bad. And I say this because I'm extremely guilty of this mindset. And yet, there are people out there who don't have a choice. Processed foods could literally save their lives. And it's a perspective I think is important to consider once in a while, because people can get so dogmatic and religious about things like this and mean to other people just because they don't believe in the same dietary beliefs. But my point is that it's important to remember people around the world that are in this situation where they just need food to survive, because that's what food's for. I'm sorry, I'm really trying not to say as much as I used to, but it's part of how I communicate, and it's very natural for me and very hard to stop doing that. Anyway, I wanted to share this story because it shines a light on this problem that most of us don't experience in the first world countries, and yet it's so rampant worldwide. We hear about it in Africa, but it's literally everywhere. I've taken food for granted my whole life, but this is a wake-up call to me. I was lucky enough to be well fed as I was developing, but many children are not. So we're going to take a minute to talk about how nutrition affects early childhood development.
Mm-hmm. According to Australian medical site osmed.com, child malnutrition includes undernutrition and overnutrition, both of which are deficiency diseases caused by inadequate nutrition. During childhood, undernutrition causes children to have less energy and less interest for learning, which negatively influences cognitive development and academic performance. Undernutrition will also affect physical growth and maturation, thus affecting growth rate, body weight, and ultimately height. Obesity is a special form of malnutrition, as this type of diet is likely to have low nutrient density as well as high fat and high carbohydrate content. There are growing concerns about the prevalence of pediatric obesity, as this comes with an increased risk of developing cardiometabolic disease in adolescence and adulthood. Obesity in children also affects confidence and competence during physical activity and thus further compounds proper growth and development.
Would you like me to read this last paragraph?
Why? Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just offering.
I know. It's good.
It continues, evidence suggests that the timing of nutritional deficiencies can also significantly affect growth and development. For example, during the fetal stage, a folic acid deficiency between 21 and 28 days after conception predisposes the fetus to congenital malformation called neural tube defect. That's just because of low vitamin B. I think that's what folic acid is. The children that early can get a birth defect. So it continues, the childhood period is also very sensitive to dietary deficiencies, particularly as the brain is undergoing major structural and cognitive maturation, or maturing. This is an Australian site, so the dialect is slightly different than we're used to. Mm-hmm. But basically the point of this is nutrition is extremely important,
right,
to developing children. I mean, if a folic acid deficiency can cause this congenital malformation, neural tube defect, and that's something I wouldn't have thought about. I'm sure when you're pregnant, your doctor will tell you to be up on this, but man, such a seemingly small thing can make a huge difference, I guess. So, Rosie, what do you think of this whole story?
Well, I think it's interesting after rewatching the movie about this whole situation, pretty much, that it stops in the camp and everything is happy, and people Oh, I just said, people are
busted.
in the arms of their loved ones and they're getting their rations and it seems like a happy ending, but then we don't think about this is not the end. It was not the end for these people. They still had to struggle to get their footing in their potentially new lives because they had nothing left from their old lives.
Yeah.
And food was a huge part of it, and children having to be concerned about dying and wanting to eat another meal so they could play is a really horrific thought.
Yeah. The movie is very Hollywood treatment, but it does really help illustrate just so we can understand what these people were going through.
Right.
And for me, it's a strong reminder why we need to keep these hungry people in mind and do what we can to help, because this isn't their fault that they're in this situation. They were literally forced into it because of these terrible circumstances where they happen to be born and live. All these children and families, they're victims of horrible circumstances caused by evil and greedy people. Again, we're so lucky to have a life where we can have smartphones and listen to podcasts. So many luxuries we enjoy in life are so unnecessary and yet seem so basic to us now. And there's nothing inherently wrong with enjoying these things, but it does put into perspective why we might want to consider doing something to help less fortunate people who are struggling just to survive. And how much easier can it get than just paying a little extra for something we use every day, knowing that it's ethically produced and that it's making a real difference in the lives of hungry children. So that's why we're really happy to be partnered with Free Lunch Coffee. I don't want to do like a skeevy tie-in here, but they are really making a difference and donating to a cause that feeds children in situations like this.
If we weren't so excited about this product because we believed in it, we wouldn't have tied this in with this episode.
So we're not like trying to pull a fast one over on you, like grab your heartstrings and then flip it into an ad. But
if we did about a coffee mug or something, maybe you could have your eyebrows up.
Yeah, but this is something that actually makes a difference.
Right.
And it's really cool. I appreciate it. Do you have anything else to say, Rosie, before we wrap it up?
No, just that I feel like more than ever before, especially if we're living in first world countries, we need these doses of reality to keep us in check. That we really have it good and we shouldn't be complaining. Yeah,
very true. It's like what you talked about last week.
I know. And I needed another reality check.
Yeah, but I guess these people in Rwanda are probably a lot more prepared to face something so uprooting to their lives than we are, because they've been fighting to survive literally for the past 30 years. So I appreciate it, this whole story. Well, we did an interview with the owner of Free Lunch Coffee that we're going to play now. So that's kind of going to wrap up this episode. Unless you have anything else to say, Rosie.
No, I don't think so. I think it's a good place to put in the interview.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
This episode of Voice of the Victim podcast is supported by Free Lunch Coffee. We recently spoke to the founder of Free Lunch Coffee, Vin Singh, and I asked him a little bit about his mission behind Free Lunch Coffee. First, I asked him how he got started.
Free Lunch Coffee, I just started about a month ago, earlier this month, and we wanted to make a real difference, not to just sell a product. So my dream is to end child hunger from this world. So it sounds really crazy, but that's what my dream is, and that's why I thought instead of starting a charity or start a business which is supporting the charity, because I know it's really hard for charity to get funding, and a lot of charity, they lose their business and mission because they lack funding. So I thought, I'll start a business where the main goal is to support the cause. So as long as people buy a product from the business, we can support the cause, and one day, hopefully, we can end child hunger. So that's the idea behind this concept. And I really believe we have so much abundance and prosperity on this planet. We have more than enough. If you look at it, we'll be going to the space for a mission, for a travel, for a vacation. Right. On the other hand, we have children, they don't get enough food. So now we have children dying because of the not getting enough nutrition. And it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, that's an awesome mission. That's something I've always felt kind of weird about, too, is thinking about how well we really have it and how easy it is to forget about the people that are struggling so much just to get by in daily life.
And we are all so connected, like now after we can see like we all share the same planet, we share the same resources like water, air, and the food.
So how did you initially get started getting this company going?
So I launched it by myself because I was in my corporate job before and I wasn't happy. I was living in Sydney, Australia, and I had a great life, but there was something missing in my life. I wasn't getting any fulfillment. I was doing the job just to get a paycheck, but I wasn't passionate about it. And I was looking for meaning and purpose in my life, and I didn't find any answer. I was like totally lost. I asked myself, what would I do if I didn't have to worry about money? And I had no answer. And then I realized, okay, I have to find myself. I have to realize who really I was. And I was too comfortable in my life. Then I said, okay, I have to get outside my comfort zone and grow and evolve. So I quit my corporate job, bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco and started traveling. And while traveling, I realized, I wanted to do something where I can make a real difference, make an impact, not just to work for money and die one day.
Right.
So this is one of the fundamental problems when I see children, especially in Africa, they get sick and they die due to malnutrition. And then I ask myself, like, it's not like we don't have enough food or we don't have enough resources. We don't distribute very well.
Right.
So that's where I thought, I wanted to do something. And actually I was looking at a company called Tom Shoes. Mm-hmm. They're doing the similar thing, but with the shoes, like if you buy one pair of shoes and they donate another pair of shoes.
Yeah, Rosie actually has Tom's shoes. She's gotten them in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well done. Good on you, Rosie. Yeah, like this is such an amazing concept. And I thought, why don't we do like with more fundamental issues, we solve the same problem with the similar kinds of concept, like, people should be doing more for food, and then if you buy a pound of food, they will donate another pound of food. Then I thought, instead of wishing somebody will do, why don't I do it? Somebody has to do it, and we have to be the change we want to see in the world. I like that quote from Gandhi, and I thought I don't have any reason not to do it. I have some savings, I put my savings and take some chance. If I lose everything, then in the worst case scenario, I can always go back in my corporate job, and it's not that bad.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Thank you.
I remember reading on the website that each bag of coffee, it provides 10 meals for children in need. So do you want to talk a bit about the box lunch program?
Yeah, I wanted to do it by myself. Then I realized I cannot do everything by myself, at least not in the beginning. So I started looking at an organization, a non-profit organization who's doing the same thing what I wanted to do. And I found this organization, it's called Lunchbox Fund. They go to the school and they distribute free meals to the school to the children, most underprivileged children. They work in South Africa at the moment. And actually I went there to visit them. So I wanted to make sure that the charity I'm supporting, they're the real deal and doing the things they are talking about. So I made a surprise visit at the end of last year in South Africa. I went to one of the schools. They said, they're supporting that school. I went there and I checked with them. I spoke to one of the volunteers there, and they said, they get free meals from Lunchbox Fund. Then I thought, this is the kind of organization I want to support. That's when I started working on free lunch coffee for every bag, supporting 10 meals to Lunchbox Fund. And on top of that, we are committed to give 50% of all the money we make to support this cause. That's where I get my fulfillment, and that's where I get inspired to do. Similar to Tom Shoes, they say one pair of shoes, they will give you one pair of people in need. But with food, it's a little bit difficult. That's why I started, I want to start where something people eat every day or drink every day, and I came to, I love gourmet coffee. And I thought, I'll start with the coffee because everybody drinks coffee.
Right.
And it's easier to inspire people. They don't have to, give money to charity. They don't have to go out of the way and give extra money to something they don't know. But if they buy, for example, coffee, and then instead of buying from some big company, they buy from a business who is more conscious, more, looking for a sustainable way. And at the same time, they're supporting a big cause like ending child hunger.
That's awesome.
I was just going to say, what I love about your product is not only are you giving through what you're selling and the profits, but also you're getting your coffee from fair trade, right? Organic fair trade beans. So it's
certified organic is fair trade,
Yeah, I love that. Because with the big corporations that say that they're going to give X amount of dollars to whatever. You don't know where their product's coming from, but I feel like yours is both ways. It's supporting, a lot of different people.
Yeah, I really respect the determination you had to go and investigate this charity to make sure that they were legitimate before you decided to support them.
Yeah, because everybody has their people don't trust business. Like, we all heard stories where like more than 50% or 75% of the money just go to admin or whatever, they don't go to the end cause.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why I was skeptical. And I wanted to do it by myself. Then I realized it's too much work for just one dude to start from the beginning. I'm just a regular guy. I wanted to do something I'm passionate about and to make a difference in this world.
Well, where can our listeners go to find more info about it?
I recommend to check out freelunchcoffee.com. We have some cool custom design mugs and tumbler. And one mug will give 10 mils and a tumbler will give 20 mils to children in need. So this is great if you're looking for a Christmas gift idea. Yeah, freelunchcoffee.com. That's the website, and you can check it out on Instagram and Facebook at freelunch.coffee. And for your listeners, we have created a special coupon code. It's called awareness. When you go on checkout, put awareness, and you get 10% discount just for your listeners.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm really excited about this, and we are brand new. We need some support so that we can grow. We are like a little baby. We need your help to spread the word so people know, because nobody knows, and I've never done business, so I'm just doing what I can.
Well, we'll do what we can to spread the word because we really appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Just check out freelunchcoffee.com if you have any questions, or follow us on Instagram, and I encourage people to support the business. They are on a mission and inspire change. We have to make the change, and we have to change our spending habit, buy a sustainable product, buy from more fair trade, more organic, so help the planet and help the people who's passionate about what they're doing.
Absolutely.
That's why I want to inspire everybody, and I want to get inspired as well.
Yeah, I'm inspired by the fact that you dropped your corporate job and went to find something you're passionate about and landed on something that helps other people. It's really cool.
Exactly. And we can help them. We can help more people to do something. If they do something they're really passionate about and they are supporting a cause, it doesn't have to be food. It could be water. It could be equal rights or whatever. And they probably get more money because they're passionate about ending some fundamental problem. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it was our pleasure. Thank you for being here.